was a pivotal event to meet him because he became a mentor and a valued friend, and helped me reconfigure myself after graduate school. I moved into New York City at that time. And he also put me in touch with my, the last violin teacher I studied with, the famous Paul Zukovsky, who these pieces were written for. And it was published in a book of 6, and I opened them up, and it was a nice note from John saying, here they are, call me if you have any questions. I wrote him a note. We didn't have the internet that day. So I wrote him a note asking if I could call him, and gave him my number. And then one night as I was puzzling over them, the phone rang, and I picked up the phone. He said, "This is John Cage. I've called to answer your questions." He felt that I was serious enough and suggested that if I wanted to, I could come into the city and play for him. I walked into his studio and I said, "I'm very nervous, and these are harder than anything I've ever seen, but I'm very anxious to see, get your input." Then he asked if I would mind if he watched the music while I played. As I started playing, I could barely keep the bow on the string, but the sensation of having him listen to me so carefully calmed me down, and I got through to the end of this first piece, and he looked at me and he said, "I'm not worried. I'll stand by the window and listen to the rest of it." I felt that he was listening to everything, and that was his charm and his charisma. But at the end of it, he said, "I've told Paul Zukovsky about you. Perhaps you'd like to play for him." From that moment on, Cage would show up. Whenever he heard that I was doing a concert, he would just show up, whether his music was being played or not, to lend support and to encourage me. I gave the premiere of 13 Harmonies from Apartment House 1776 at a church in Manhattan. And my friend Sandra Elm was at the door taking the tickets. And I had sent out a special invitation to John saying, "I'm going to premiere the entire work. Please come as my guest." So John shows up, walks up to Sandra and says, "I'd like a ticket, please." And she looks at him. She worked 2 blocks away from his apartment and knew him very well by sight, had never talked to him. And she looked at him and said, aren't you on this list?" And John said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Well, aren't you, there's someone important. I think that I have a ticket for you." He said, "No, you don't. Sorry, I'd just like to buy this ticket." And she said, "What's your name?" And he said, "I don't have a name." It wasn't necessary for him to prepare an audience, because if you knew anything about him, especially his books, he wrote many, many books, you would know 2 things. One is that no matter what you expected, something else would happen. And the other thing was that the gift of attentive listening is the greatest gift for humans. So it's not that you were going to go to a concert with the expectation of something that you knew beforehand, but in going to the concert, I think he would hope that you were surprised and perhaps entertained.